the body of Christ. So today I'm going to talk about criticism. There was once, D.L. Moody was a great evangelist of yesterday, and he finished one of his great evangelism moments, and about 250 people had come forward and given their life to Christ. And afterwards, there was this little lady who came up to him and greeted him, and then she said to him, Dr. Moody, I just need to tell you that during your presentation, you made 45 grammatical errors. And she was quite serious. And Dr. Moody said to her, she says, let's see, I think the count that I heard earlier was 250. That's about 5.5 per grammatical error. I'll try to work on that average. But there's really more important things than my grammar that are going on here. Or maybe the new preacher, maybe this story you've heard before. The new preacher comes, and you know how it is. I know what it's like. We stand at the back door, and people come by. I'm always just kind of tempted just to say anything to see if we really talk to each other during that time, you know. But there was this little guy who came by, and he would come by and he'd say, your tie was crooked. And then he'd come back a little bit later, and they'd say, you spoke too long. And he'd come back a little bit later. And so he made about 6 or 7 rounds past the preacher, and every time he would say something different. And finally the preacher just had enough, and he turned to one of the people who knew everybody and said, you know, there's always one who knows everybody. And then he said, well, tell me the story here. Oh, don't worry about it. He just says what everybody else is saying, and they won't say to your face. Some of us were raised in this very critical world. We call it, I don't know about you, but you ever driven with some backseat drivers? Front seat driver. Don't look at somebody else, just looking at you, okay? Or the Monday morning quarterbacks. Today there's a lot of quarterbacks, LSU, or they should have done, and should have, could have. Those critics that are inside and outside of our world. You know what they're like. Maybe it's a critical parent that you were raised with, or maybe it's a critical spouse, or maybe it's a critical friend, or maybe it's that boss that doesn't say anything that you've done right, but only points out the one thing that you have done wrong, and is always there with those wonderful words of life that you feel so deeply in your life. So, in Jesus' life, there were always people like that too. There was the Pharisees, there were Sadducees. They were always religiously criticizing what he said, what he did, who he was with, who he wasn't with, all of those kind of things. But then there were people even within his own group that would criticize him. Remember Rocky? Peter criticizes him. Don't talk like that, Jesus. They don't want to hear about that resurrection and crucifixion stuff. Don't talk about that. And then in this point, we find that Judas, the one who we know is going to betray him, it jumps on Mary. Who would jump on Mary? My goodness. What are you doing? And he does it because Mary has stopped what she was doing like she always does, you know. Martha's servant. Mary has stopped what she's doing, and she anoints Jesus' feet with this nard that fills the room. And then she wipes his feet with her hair. What a wonderful expression. Extravagant expression. And that expression fills the whole room. And Judas can't stand it anymore. What a waste. What a waste. And then, of course, he's going to bring up something that nobody can argue against. Arguing against the poor, you know, it's kind of like arguing against motherhood. It's arguing against should the Saints win? Should McNeese win? But Jesus of Nazareth takes him on. Jesus doesn't let that pass. Jesus takes him on and says, Judas. I can just hear him. Judas, 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 Judas. And he points out the extravagance of that gift and the appropriateness of that gift. And the fragrance of the gift and the fragrance of her offering is not consumed by the critical words of Judas. How I want that in my life. I just want to tell you, if you want to know some criticisms, come stand here for a couple of weeks. There's all kinds of things that people can find that the church or the church staff is doing wrong or not doing right. Or it's not the way we used to do it, all right. But you know, Critical people, this is what I've learned. Most critical words that are said in the present usually are rooted in the past. May I say that again? Critical words that are said in the present are usually rooted in the past. And I want to give you a couple of words about that. In that, hurt people hurt people. Hurt people hurt people. When you've been hurt by someone else, you don't want to bleed alone. You want everybody else to be hurt too. Well, it's sort of like, well, he did it first. They hit me first. We want others to know our own pain and suffering. And so a lot of our criticism and a lot of our weariness that we give to others is just really rooted in our own stuff. And our own journey of critical parenthood or critical relationships, or just sometimes it's just us beating up on ourselves. We don't need anybody else's help. We can do it all by ourselves. A young couple was married, and in the early years of their marriage, they struggled because there was this, I call it the bark, the yang. Maybe you don't know what that looks like, but it shows in all marriages a little bit one time or another. It's those days that you just want to fight. You just turn up. Today's not a good day. Let's just have a good one. And but it was rooted more so in both of their past, because they both lived in a critical family to where parents were always doing what? Always chipping away. And they didn't understand it until they did understand it, and they began to realize, I don't have to be that way. I don't have to respond that way. I can learn new ways of behavior. And they began to understand that criticism usually is rooted in our past. Or Henry Nouwen says it this way. He says, open wounds stink. And some of us have been walking throughout our life with this open wound that somebody else inflicted on us, and we haven't really asked to be healed, or we haven't taken care of healing it. And so it's kind of sort of like this. See my open wound? And my open wound gives me the right or the opportunity to wound what? Others. And so we find ourselves in the past and forgetting the present, and forgetting the blessedness of the moments that we have, until sometimes it's too late. Now, here's my word for you in that midst, is that God offers us healing in that. That in that you can do the work of faith, and you can learn that I don't want to be like my parents, or I don't want to be like my coworker. I don't want to be this person that's always seen as the yin yang. Or when I'm that way, I need to stop and think about what I'm doing and invite God to change my words. But then there's another part of this of criticism that I want you to understand. There are actually persons in your life that you need to hear. That you need to empower them to be your helpful critics, to be the ones that help you overcome your behavior that is really just pretty detrimental to life. There's a thing called tough love, and I've actually helped families walk through this valley that is a very hard valley. It's where you have to teach your kids, that adult children mostly, or teenage children, that they're not welcome to just act out all the time. Tough love is saying that I know this is difficult, but this is still what it means to grow in the faith. This is what it means to grow up. Tough love is not rescuing people who are in an addictive behavior. Tough love is saying those difficult words that tell people really how you've hurt them. It's almost like that whole process that we see in the 12-step programs. Tough love realizes that you are responsible for your behavior. But there are people in your life who can help you become more. Some of you may have seen that movie that's As Good as It Gets, where Melvin and Carol. Melvin is this eccentric guy, Jack Nicholson, and he meets Carol, and then he meets the little dog, and you know that movie and everything else. And his life begins to change. At first, to try to keep his world intact, only to find that in doing that, his world what? Is turned upside down. And remember the scene in the restaurant, to where he's worked his way up, and he says, I have a gift to give you today. And he says, what does he say? You make me want to be a better man. And it's a transforming. That didn't last for long because he's got to mess with it a little bit, but it was the beginning of a transforming relationship that changed their lives. There are people in your life who can help you do that, and can help you in the faith, a mentor, a coach, a good friend who will pray with you, somebody who you admire, who can help you begin that transforming relationship in your life. In Ephesians, there's that text of chapter 4, verse 15. It says, instead, speak the truth in love. We will grow to become, in every respect, the mature body of Him who is the head, that is Christ. The truth in love. You see, we just don't assume that position. You don't just come up to me and say, well, Jack, you're here at St. Luke-Simpson and you're my pastor, so let me tell you the things that you need to straighten out. No, it is a relationship of love, of unconditional love that we work at, that we pray with and through. And it's there that critical words become not words that hurt us, but words that what? Encourage us and help us grow. Because it's the truth in what? Love. Jesus of Nazareth was traveling through, and he ends up at the well. And there's this woman at the well. And the woman comes there at a time when no one else is there, because everybody knows the truth about her, and she knows the truth about herself. But Jesus comes to her and says, I have this water that I can give you, that you will never thirst. Jesus tells the truth about herself. This is your 5th person that you've married. And she's amazed that not only does this man, who is obviously not of her kind, of her background, but this man has taken the time to know the truth about her, and yet wants to give her what? New life. And she goes away, and her invitation is to those that she meets, come and see. Could this be the Messiah? Could this be where God is at work in life? Because why? She wanted to be somewhere else and somebody else, and somebody had spoken not words of harsh condemnation, not criticism, but the truth. But the truth what? In love. And so that's our invitation today. You know, the big question that you and I shared with one another: will the aroma of the great offering that we offer to Jesus and to one another fill our world? So that people will say, when they see you and me, and when they see how we relate to one another and how we care for one another, they go, man, that is some kind of good Christianity going there. Smell that, instead of smelling like roadkill Christians that nobody wants to see and nobody wants to smell. So I invite you today, come and do the work. You know what God is saying to you about your harsh words, about where you were, but where you want to be. And so the invitation is ours. Come. When Jesus would preach, he would say these words: let those with ears hear the word of the Lord. Holy moments, you're invited.